right. Hello again, Avengers, and welcome to another exciting daily vlog. This is daily vlog number 182, and today I would like to know if you have heard the good news about our Lord and Savior. Insert religion here. I had this weird idea, and I'm going to take a drink. I had this weird idea thinking about how we've been focusing on tabletop RPG design just in general. And something that I probably should have talked about when we talked about the cleric is the idea of religions and what parts they play in tabletop RPGs in general. Because two of the more classic character classes from fantasy-based RPGs are the cleric or the priest and the paladin, which are both characters that dedicate themselves to the beliefs and the proliferation of the belief structure of a deity or a system of worship. And I've had conversations with other tabletop RPG players, both new and old, talking about the idea of religion in general, how it relates to tabletop RPGs, and why even in more modern and even futuristic tabletop RPGs, religion still tends to play a really, really big part from a game design perspective. Like, there's almost always a cleric-style character. And in order for there to be a cleric-style character, in the most traditional sense, they need a deity to worship. And so you see even in things like Warhammer 40K, they will still have... I don't know if they have actual deities in 40K, because I'm not as big on the lore. But I do know they have kind of systems of worship in there. That whether they are worshipping actual deities or just kind of the idea of something, it still offers a similar position in that society. And I had an argument once with this kid that it was one of the first tabletop RPG campaigns I'd ever played in. It was D&D 4th edition, and I was actually playing a Blade Singer. I was playing a Tiefling Blade Singer, because for whatever reason, I had this hang up, and I thought Tieflings were the coolest things ever. And then I found the Eladrin, and I never went back. But I was playing a Tiefling Blade Singer, and he decided that he wanted to play a Paladin. Now, there were two kind of really big defining features about this person outside of his character. Just this is him as a person. One, he had anger management problems. He would get really, really kind of he would get extremely upset when things didn't go the way that he wanted them to in the game, to the point where, like, when he rolled poorly, he would throw dice across the room. He would throw objects across the room. He'd get up and scream and, like, punch the air. I think he smashed my table a couple of times, which was a really dumb idea because it was a cheap-ass table. And he was a bigger guy. So if he'd hit it too hard, it would have just... everything on it would have just been gone. So that was one thing. The other thing was... he was, for lack of a better term, he was an extremely devout atheist. And if anyone is starting to go, wait a minute, how can you be a devout atheist? Devotion, stuff like that would mean you would be devoted to some kind of system, and atheism is just the belief that there is no God. There's not a system there. Well, we can talk about the more nuanced aspects of whether atheism in and of itself is a religion or a lack of religion and things like that. However, when I call him an extremely devout atheist, he didn't just believe that there was no God, which, based on the actions that he took, I don't think he actually believed that. He just was mad that there was a God. And so decided in his mind, I'm not trying to say that you have to agree with me or anything like that. That was how he kind of acted. When he was just so upset about the existence of a God. It's like, no, they don't exist. And he would evangelize and proselytize about atheism and how everyone should agree that it's the most amazing thing. He would bash every religion he had any possibility of being anywhere near, which for me, being a relatively devout Christian, made for interesting conversations. And in general, my response to him was just to go, okay, that's perfectly fine, and then move on. Because arguing with someone like that really is pointless for a number of reasons. They don't actually want to find the truth or anything. They don't even want to convince you that they're right. They want you to admit that you're wrong. So in situations like that, it's just pointless. So when you combine someone that has massive anger management issues, is extremely devout atheist, and then he decides to play a paladin, things got weird really, really quickly, because we would have these arguments. It's like, well, I'm going to be a paladin. It's like, oh, cool. Paladins are super cool, especially in 4th edition. Paladins could do some super awesome, amazing shit. He's like, yeah, but I'm an atheist paladin. Doesn't work that way. No, I'm an atheist paladin. And we all tried to kind of sit him down and go, okay, so I get that in the real world, you're an atheist because you claim that there's no proof of the existence of God and things like that. That's not how it works. We were playing in the Forgotten Realms. It's like, that's not how it works in the Forgotten Realms. Like, in the Forgotten Realms, there aren't atheists, because it's not just like the gods, like everybody believes. The gods literally interfere in daily life on a regular basis. Like, there was a period of time where they were just walking around Faerun, like physical, in the flesh deities. A few of the more popular Forgotten Realms characters have slept with deities. Like, it's not like people are trying to figure out the meaning of life, or, is there a God? No, everybody knows that there's gods. The gods are very, very clear about this. They are always interfering constantly. And there's that whole thing that the gods actually provide spells to their followers. So it's not even like, well, can you prove there's a God? Sure. Divine Bolt. What? Guiding Bolt. How is that proof? It's like, where did that magic come from? You didn't see me spend, 400 hours studying. I'm not a kid of a dragon or anything. There's no contract. Where'd the magic come from? Oh, you mean the massive deity that I pray to every single day, that I've actually spoken to on a few occasions, because that's an actual spell? You mean if the thing that if you get to a high enough level, you can actually plane shift to their personal kingdom, their personal plane of existence? Yeah, that thing. So he would just get into these massive arguments all the time, going, well, no, I'm a. It's like, maybe we can make you a barbarian. Barbarians are super, super cool, and or we can make you a fighter, or we can make you a slayer. A slayer is like a fighter, but they just kill stuff, or maybe we could choose something else. There's like purple dragon knights, like those are pretty cool, or you could be a bard. Why do you have to be a paladin? Because there are no gods. No, there are, though. Like, I get it. Real world, we can talk about this later. We're not talking about the real world. In the make-believe world, gods are real. And everybody knows that. There's nobody that's going. Now there are some people like, well, maybe they're not gods or something like that. Like, well, maybe they're just super powerful assholes. So maybe you want to. Maybe that's how we'll build your characters. It's not that you don't believe that there's that gods don't exist. You just think that these super powerful beings just aren't quote unquote gods. They're just really powerful beings that people worship as gods, but they're false gods. How about that? It's like, no, there are no gods. Okay, fine, whatever. We've been arguing about this for an hour. The rest of us would like to play our characters. So that conversation always comes back to me when I start talking about kind of religious systems in tabletop RPGs, because they provide a really essential part, not only of the kind of lore of the world, but they present a mechanical aspect to your game design that I think a lot of people kind of don't think about. Because when people think about game design, a lot of times they're thinking about things like, okay, what are the rules for the system, how do rolls work, how do attack rolls and that, what are your rules for different conditions, or their opportunity attacks and stuff like that. And then they'll think about things like, okay, well, what about classes? That's game design as well. But they don't think about how the world itself affects game design. Specifically, when you're looking at a religious system, your classes are going to have to be built around the idea of, if you want to have deities in your system, which not all tabletop RPGs have deities. The vast majority of kind of fantasy-based ones tend to have some sort of pantheon, either one that exists now or one that used to exist. And like I said, a remarkable number of science fiction and futuristic ones, and even modern ones, have kind of deities or pseudo-deities that exist. So from a game design standpoint, making the decision of whether or not you want to have deities in your system is actually going to massively change how you design it. Specifically around the idea of basically supernatural abilities. If you want to have an extremely low magic, very kind of realistic, almost like Conan the Barbarian style, or I guess Conan was more sword and sorcery. But a really kind of brutal, where there really isn't magic or anything like that, then deities can just not exist. But as soon as you start dealing with supernatural anything, whether it is magic, whether it is things like undeath and stuff like that, you start having to think about, okay, well, what stops, like undeath is a really, really good example of where some sort of deity or religious system tends to make sense, because undeath in and of itself is supposed to be unnatural. And so when you get to the point where you're dealing with skeletons or zombies, there has to be a reason why it doesn't happen all the time. And a deity that, or some force that controls life and death is a really, really simple solution as to how undeath can happen. If undeath doesn't happen, then it's really, really simple. It's just like, yeah, once you're dead, you're dead. It's how it works. It's kind of the same reason why nobody ever asks why zombies don't exist in the real world, because they don't make sense. Like, everything we know about biology, physics, everything says zombies just can't exist. Doesn't stop us from making a billion different zombie movies, some of which really good, a lot of which not so much. But in a system where there aren't any supernatural things, whether that's undeath, zombies, ghosts, if you want to deal with vampires, other things like that, a really, really simple solution to that is to have something that their job is to oversee life and death. And if you look at every kind of pantheon for any tabletop RPG, there is almost always a deity who either their primary responsibility is life and death, or it's another thing that they do. And when we look at polytheistic societies throughout history, one of the deities that always shows up is some kind of god of death, or somebody whose job it is to deal with where do we go after we die. So from a game design standpoint, making a decision about whether you want to have a monotheistic religion, what was it? Is it Greyhawk, I want to say? Technically has a monotheistic religious system. The Church of the Silver Flame, I think is what it's called. Let me look that up before I say the wrong thing. Greyhawk Church. Or Greyhawk Pantheon. There we go. I guess there's a lot more here than I was thinking. Yeah, because there's Baklunish, Oridan, Flansul, Dol Amun. I thought there was... There is a D&D setting where they have... It might be Eberron, maybe? Even though they do have technically multiple things, where they have a monotheistic religious system that I find really, really interesting, because whether or not deities exist, somebody has kind of taken over and said, well, no, there's only one. And that can actually inspire a lot of your class design. If you look at something like the Dragon Age, the world of Dragon Age in general, they don't technically have deities like we would see in like the Forgotten Realms. Obviously, with Dreadwolf, which is now called the Veilguard, the elves had quote unquote deities, but slight spoiler alert: we basically eventually find out that they aren't, deities like we would consider them from like D&D. They're just really, really powerful mortals that decided to allow their followers to worship them in that way, because it created a system of governance. But because of the elves being the only ones that actually had, deities that they worshipped, you had a completely different design of how everything else worked. Like magic had to be controlled, and so the Templars, which are effectively the paladins of the Dragon Age system and world, were no longer dedicated to a deity. They were specifically there to guard and hunt, in certain cases, the mages. They were there as a stopgap to prevent the mages from becoming too powerful. And so I kind of think in a tabletop RPG, the idea of what kind of pantheon you want to use can dictate a lot of the systems that you have to have in place. If deities are going to be in your system, you're going to have a mechanical system that you decide on well, how do the deities deal with the world? And in general, it's not going to be the players that get to interact with the systems. It's generally going to be exclusively to the DM. And as far as mechanics, it's not going to be, okay, well, you roll a DC 30, religion check, and then the deity does this. What I mean by kind of a mechanical system is you have to have kind of rules in place for how the deities can interact with the world. Again, for Forgotten Realms, there's the Tablets of Fates and the various domains that each of the deities preside over actually gives them power and authority to do things in the world. Bahamut can't really do a whole lot in the realm of murder because it's not part of his divine domain. It's not what he's really That's not his job. Whereas Bahal, murder's, totally his best thing. However, healing magic, not so much. It's not a thing that Bahal really specializes in. Unhealing magic, totally. So by deciding upon a whether or not you want to have a pantheon for your campaign setting, or even just for your Giga game, it's going to dictate, is your cleric, first of all, do clerics exist, or do you have another kind of healer style character that takes the place of a cleric but doesn't have religious overtones? Are paladins going to exist? Are other things like avengers or druids, because they tend to have a kind of religious slant to them, where they tend to worship nature as opposed to a specific deity, but a lot of times there'll be a deity of nature. So druids will dedicate them and they basically become a nature cleric. So all those things are going to impact actual mechanical benefits. On the same side, a monotheistic religion, like here's something from my world that most of my players are aware of, because it's part of the campaign Bible that I give out at the beginning of any of my campaigns. In my campaign, there is a pantheon. However, the pantheon is very hands-off the world. And thus far, none of my players have discovered this, because it's part of effectively a lost history. But the reason that the deities in my world are hands-off are for two reasons. One, the entire reason the deities exist is, as the world became more complicated, as more things started to kind of come into existence, rules and systems had to be put in place to deal with all of these new things, like life and death. When sentient and sapient creatures were first starting to appear in the world, things were fine. And when they died, the kind of eternal aspect of them, their soul, you could call it, could just kind of go around and then come back and be perfectly fine. There really wasn't that much. But as more creatures died and more creatures started to kind of evolve from the chaos of nothingness, eventually someone had to be there, or something had to be there to figure out what to do with these creatures that were being created and then uncreated and recreated again and again and again in this kind of strange cycle. Because if something didn't do something, then eventually there would be kind of a catastrophic failure, where there'd just be this overload of soulless bodies that have nothing to do. And so in my world, I really like the idea of the what are they called? The muses. I think the muses from Greek mythology I find absolutely fascinating. And so in my world, the muses are a real thing, but as opposed to being actual, creations of the gods or something like that, they are simply a force that, when an aspect of reality starts becoming effectively too complicated, a muse will not really be born, but will effectively awaken. And that muse's job is to basically inspire creativity and inspire greatness around everyone around them, until they find a singular person that will fit whatever existence needs at that particular point. So if we need someone to rule over life and death, then a muse will suddenly awaken inside of someone, and they will have the ability to basically kind of bless people around them to become hyper creative, to be able to do amazing things. And eventually, as they are just inspiring everyone around them, they'll eventually find a specific person that's going, wow, this person is very, very organized. They understand kind of justice and right and wrong. And I think they're a very good judge of character. They could very easily kind of oversee the passage of life into death and ensure that, these souls went to the correct place to be recycled. That's another aspect of my campaign setting that none of my players have discovered yet, because it's, again, part of this forgotten history. So, yeah, that's where my deities come from. And it's one of the reasons why they don't interact is they have full-time jobs. The Dark Lady, who is the goddess of death, has to spend the entirety of her existence ensuring that death is working the way it's supposed to. And when she doesn't, then bad things start happening. Not just like undead starting to raise, but people will just stop dying. So they will have mortal wounds and stuff like that, but will continue living their lives, unable to die, but also unable to live. So they're not really undead at that point. They're not reanimated corpses. Their body just refuses to end. The other reason why the deities don't interact is because they tried it once. There was this thing near the beginning of the history of my world called the Chosen War that I was inspired by the beginning of 5th edition in the Forgotten Realms. There was this thing called the Second Sundering. And what it was years ago, Ao, the overgod of the Forgotten Realms, had destroyed the Tablets of Fate. And the Tablets of Fate effectively decided who the greater and lesser gods were, and it also would record what their spheres of influence were, what their portfolio was. And one of the deities, or a few of them, I think, were basically saying, hey, Ao gets all of his power from these Tablets of Fate. If we steal them, we steal Ao's power. Ao never got his power from the Tablet of Fate. He's just the supreme overgod. And so they stole them. He got pissed off, banished all the deities back to the world. Eventually, the tablets were returned to him. He went, you guys think these are so important? Shkoosh! They're all gone. The Second Sundering, what happened was Ao decided that he wanted to bring back the Tablets of Fate to kind of make everything normal again. And because of that, all the gods started vying with each other to try and get as many worshippers as possible on the world, and to have the most powerful presence on the world, because they thought that that would give them a better chance of being a greater deity versus a lesser deity. And one of the things that they did was they would create these chosen. They would actually seal a portion of themselves inside a mortal, and that mortal would have amazing powers. Elminster, which is Ed Greenwood, the guy who created Forgotten Realms, Elminster is effectively his self-insert. Elminster is a chosen of Mystra. So is Kelburn Blackstaff. Both of these predate the Second Sundering by decades. But Second Sundering just had this kind of explosion of chosen showing up everywhere. And so I really liked that idea, but I thought in my world, in a world where deities are not just kind of sitting around and, oh yeah, I'm supposed to do this, but I also get to meddle and all that, when their entire purpose is, no, I have a job to do and that's what I have to do. Having them split some of their power into a mortal body causes issues. And so this thing happened where there was this event called the Chosen War, where each of the deities made a chosen, and the chosen fought amongst themselves to see who could come out on top. Well, when they realized that because they were all basically had bits of a god inside of them, they were all relatively evenly matched. And so what eventually happened is they start recruiting, not only recruiting other people to their cause, they start raising armies. And when there's not enough mortals, because they have a spark of divine power, they start creating beings out of nothing. And that messes everything up. It breaks the balance of the entire world. It starts causing really, really big issues with reality in general. And it threatens to break the world. And so when the Chosen Wars end, all the deities basically agree, hey, we're never doing that again. We're not going to interfere. So because of that, in my polytheistic society, for most of my world, churches and things like that have a remarkable amount of power and authority, depending on where you are, simply because the gods don't talk to mortals. And so everybody knows that they exist because divine magic exists, but no one can figure out what the will of the gods are. And so the churches kind of show up, and the head priests of each of the churches, or head clerics of each church, will claim that they alone can contact the deities. Now, none of them have done that for generations. But that's how they remain in power. It's like, I am the only person that can tell you what your God really wants you to do. And so that, from a mechanical standpoint, that really changed how I treat casters in general. Paladins in my system work in a very, very different way. And the first campaign, the Kingdom of the Chaos Isles, was actually meant to be a second Chosen War, because one of the player characters actually became chosen of the Dark Lady. Also, another thing, nobody on my world actually knows what the gods' names are. They just know their epithet. The Dark Lady, the Nurturing Gardener, the Valiant Warrior. That's what they refer to everybody as. They have real names. But the names of the deities are so powerful that if anyone ever learns them, they can actually invoke a bit of that deity's power. So with all that stuff happening, there is one kingdom in my campaign setting in the north that is monotheistic. Now, I've already mentioned there are deities that already exist. And everybody knows that these deities exist because they've forgotten about the Chosen War. But again, that whole divine magic thing makes it pretty obvious. So this monotheistic kingdom is, first of all, ruled by the church. And the way that they explain divine magic is there is only one God, but that God has different aspects. And that's how they explain the kind of polytheistic aspects of magic in general, and how you can devote yourself to death or devote yourself to magic or whatever. Those are all different aspects of one divine being. And they view literally the rest of the world as effectively kind of savage, unintelligent primitives. And so, again, from a mechanical standpoint, I have an entire campaign idea that's set in that world, set in that kingdom, and has to deal with the birth of a new deity happening within that kingdom, and exactly what happens when something like that happens. When there's a society that believes there is only one God, so you can't birth a new deity. There's only one. They've always existed, and they always will exist. So kind of an unreliable narrator aspect there and all that. Anyway, getting back to mechanics, it means that, paladins in that system react very, very differently, or in that kingdom react very, very differently to paladins than everywhere else. And it also means, from a roleplay perspective, I had a lot of fun in Kingdom of the Chaos Isles. I had a lot of fun having people from that kingdom eventually come to the Chaos Isles and interact with the party, and they just went, "Oh, you guys believe in multiple gods? No, that's adorable. You guys are great." So we're coming here to make sure everything's okay. You guys go ahead and believe in your nonsense. And it was so much fun to watch the players go, "But are these guys stupid?" Like, they were just so unbelievably condescending, because that's their society, and it was really, really fun to play. So anyway, back to mechanical aspects of religious systems in general. I think the idea of a pantheon and deities in tabletop RPGs can have a massive mechanical impact on your game, not just from this is how divine magic works. But when a DM or GM is making rulings, understanding how the divine system itself works is going to influence how they interpret rules and how they interpret how different spells work and things like that. Because once you understand the why of how magic works in there, the what of it becomes significantly more simple. So yeah, like I said, I find it a fascinating topic. Also, I really enjoy talking about this militant atheist who just had to play an atheist paladin and would get really, really mad when the dice didn't work the way he wanted to. Because to this day, it is the funniest, terrifying thing that has ever happened in my apartment, in any place I have ever lived. So, anyway, like I said, it's a topic that I find really, really fascinating. Even if you're not going to have kind of a default campaign setting, the existence of deities is going to be evident based on your either class design, or if you're doing a skill-based RPG, your skill system and stuff like that. All of that is going to be affected about whether or not deities exist, what kind of deities they are, how kind of hands-on they are with the world. All of those things are going to affect how your game runs. And even if you don't name them or anything like that, the sheer fact that they can exist is going to change how you write your classes, your monsters, everything. So, like I said, I think it's a really fascinating to the topic. I'm interested to hear what you guys think. Do you guys like Pantheons in D&D or any other system? Do you prefer systems that don't have deities in general, or have like really hands-off deities? Do you prefer a system where the gods are not only real but are like actively shaping how the world works? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that is all for me today. I'll see you guys in the next time. All right, bye bye.